The story begins not with love but with the illusion of it. The kind of illusion that Hollywood has always known how to spin, sharpen, and sell. And the truth behind Dakota Johnson and Sam Heughan is a perfect example of how rumors become reality in the eyes of an audience that wants to believe in them. How the subtle gestures of co-stars, sometimes nothing more than professionalism, sometimes the camaraderie of colleagues who respect each other's craft, are blown into narratives of secret, passion and clandestine romance. And it all began on the glittering night of the premiere of The Sapphire Room, a film in which Dakota starred alongside Sam, the Scottish actor immortalized by Outlander, whose rugged charm and cultivated image of soulful masculinity had won him legions of fans across the globe. And as Dakota walked into the premiere, poised, elegant, and detached in the way that only someone raised in the relentless glare of Hollywood could be, the press recorded every movement, every expression, every nuance of her body language, because they were waiting not just for a performance on screen but for a story off it. A story they could sell to audiences who craved romance as much as they craved art. And when Sam's eyes lingered on Dakota that evening, described breathlessly by some journalists as a gaze so intense it seemed the world fell silent around it, the seed of rumor was planted, the narrative ready to sprout at the first opportunity. The moment that followed, two actors leaving an after-party together, climbing into a waiting SUV, hands brushing, caught in the flash of a camera, was all the proof the public needed, or so they thought, because when photographs hit the news the next morning, headlines exploded with declarations. Hollywood has a new couple, Dakota and Sam, and captions whispered of electricity, of chemistry, of an unspoken bond that had transformed the professional into the personal, and the world, ever hungry for celebrity romance, accepted the fiction as fact, because after all, the eyes do not lie, do they? Yet what no one knew, what only Dakota and Sam understood in that moment before stepping into the SUV, was the truth that stripped away all fantasy. Dakota had turned to Sam with a look that was firm but kind, a boundary carefully drawn, and said, "Don't let anyone get the wrong idea, Sam. We're colleagues, and I don't want anything to cross that line." That single sentence carried the weight of years of experience, the wisdom of someone who had grown up under scrutiny, the daughter of Don Johnson and Melanie Griffith, the granddaughter of Tippi Hedren, a woman raised in an ecosystem where public affection could be dissected into spectacle, where the innocence of a hug could be spun into scandal, where every smile could be reframed as a confession. And because of that, Dakota had never been one for public displays of affection, not because she was cold or detached, but because she understood better than most that in Hollywood, the gaze of the public was always sharper, always hungrier, always willing to distort truth into drama. So when, weeks later, Dakota was asked in an interview whether she and Sam shared natural chemistry, she offered a smile, but those who looked closely could see the careful guard behind it, the protective mask of someone deflecting with grace. "Sam is a great co-star," she replied evenly. "We can do a passionate love scene at 10 a.m. and have sandwiches together at noon. It's business, nothing more." Yet her words, though clear, were drowned out by the noise of the narrative that had already taken root. Because the public rarely listens for nuance. They listen for confirmation of what they want to believe. And so her insistence on professionalism was ignored. Her smile replayed endlessly in fan-edited videos where her gaze on Sam was slowed down, paused, looped, captioned, and framed as evidence of a secret affection. Over the next 6 months, the rumors grew like wildfire. Fans created entire online communities dedicated to the fantasy of Sam and Dakota together. Sam Coda accounts proliferated across Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, where users pieced together montages of stolen glances, rehearsed laughter, scripted intimacy from film scenes, and interviews edited to fit the storyline of romance. A fleeting smile Dakota had given Sam during a press junket became a viral photo with captions declaring, "She's in love." Fanfiction flourished, blogs speculated about clandestine holidays in Scotland, tabloids reported sightings of the two holding hands at hotels, and more creative outlets fabricated stories of Sam writing Dakota love poems in quiet moments. The more Dakota remained silent, the louder the speculation grew, because silence in the theater of celebrity is never interpreted as neutrality. It is interpreted as confirmation, and Dakota's refusal to comment only seemed to validate the fantasy. But then, on a gray Wednesday in mid-October, When speculation had reached fever pitch, Dakota Johnson decided to reclaim the narrative. Without warning, without preamble, she uploaded a 5-minute video to her Instagram. A video stripped of glamour, filmed in a white room with no editing, no filters, no music, just her seated, looking straight into the camera, her face bare of pretense. Hollywood collectively held its breath. "I need to make something clear," she began, her voice calm but unyielding. "And I need you to hear me without trying to make assumptions. Sam Heughan and I are colleagues, co-stars, and that's it." Her eyes, steady and unblinking, carried the weight of someone who had lived her entire life navigating rumor and innuendo. Someone weary of projection but unwilling to remain silent any longer. "I do not have never had, and probably never will have romantic feelings for Sam." The words were precise, unequivocal, crafted not to wound but to clarify, to carve through the fog of fiction that had enshrouded her life for half a year. And yet, even as she spoke, there was an awareness that the truth would not fully extinguish the myth, because once a story has been written into the collective imagination, it rarely dies, it merely retreats into the shadows, waiting to resurface when the opportunity arises. To understand why Dakota's words carried such weight, one has to appreciate the peculiar alchemy of celebrity culture, where chemistry on screen is not allowed to remain within the boundaries of art, but is constantly collapsed into the personal lives of actors, where audiences conditioned by decades of Hollywood love stories struggle to accept that fiction can be fiction, that performance can be professional, that chemistry can be constructed and then dismantled at will. Dakota, raised among legends, knew this truth better than most, and her guardedness was not cynicism but survival. She understood that the price of visibility was the erosion of privacy, and that every denial could be reinterpreted as deflection, every silence as secrecy. Sam, for his part, navigated the rumors with the easy humor of someone accustomed to the projections of fandom, but even he seemed caught off guard by the intensity of speculation, the way ordinary interactions, a laugh, a shared anecdote, became overinterpreted as romantic cues. For months, the two of them were trapped in a dance they had not choreographed, actors in a script they had never agreed to perform, their lives consumed by a fiction authored not by screenwriters but by fans and tabloids. Yet Dakota's video marked a turning point, not only for her but for the conversation around celebrity culture itself. It raised uncomfortable questions. Why do audiences demand romance from those who give them art? Why is chemistry on screen never allowed to remain sacred to performance? Why must women, in particular, constantly on screen, and that the most compelling chemistry is often the most carefully constructed illusion? Looking back, the story of Dakota Johnson and Sam Heughan is not about love but about perception, projection, and the powerful machinery of rumor, a machinery that takes fragments of reality, a lingering gaze, a shared car, a smile, and weaves them into narratives that overshadow truth. It is about how audiences, hungry for fairy tales, sometimes refuse to accept that not every man and woman cast as lovers are destined to be lovers in life, that sometimes art is only art, performance only performance. Dakota's refusal to indulge the fantasy, her insistence on clarity, becomes more than just a denial. It becomes an act of resistance against a culture that often confuses desire with entitlement, imagination with fact. And perhaps that is the real story here. Not the romance that never was, but the courage it...
Rolling cameras, take a seat.
What the world had witnessed on screens and red carpets, what fans had stitched together in endless montages of lingering glances and slowed-down smiles, what tabloids had plastered across their pages as though it were undeniable truth, was not love, not romance, not even the faint shadow of a secret affair, but rather a role, a job, a profession carried out by two people who happened to share a certain chemistry in front of the camera, because that was what their work demanded. Because film is, at its essence, the art of making the unreal seem real. And yet when Dakota Johnson finally stood before the camera alone in her white room and spoke with quiet firmness, cutting through months of frenzied speculation, the public's reaction came in waves, the first and most powerful wave being shock, because for half a year they had convinced themselves that the silence was not just silence but tacit confirmation. And now, hearing her words, they felt the rupture of a fantasy denied. The hashtag Dakota Speaks began to circulate within hours, trending across platforms, a rallying point for both disappointment and support. Some fans reacted with disbelief, commenting beneath her video that she must be denying her true feelings out of fear, insisting that what they had seen in her eyes could not be mere professionalism, that love, once glimpsed, could not be hidden again, while others, more measured, responded with relief, praising her for finally speaking out, for reclaiming the narrative that had been wrested from her by headlines, blogs, and fan speculation. The next morning, news sites ran bold headlines. Dakota Johnson. I never loved Sam Heughan. Phrases designed to sting, to turn her measured clarification into a blunt denial that carried a harsher tone than she had actually intended. But such is the nature of media, to amplify, to distort, to transform nuance into sensationalism. And beneath the noise of commentary and speculation, one person remained utterly silent, off-air. Neither confirmation nor denial, neither protest nor endorsement. Sam Heughan himself, the man at the center of the storm, who continued to work, to appear at events, to smile politely without fueling the flames. His silence a counterbalance to Dakota's spoken truth. Yet behind the scenes, behind the carefully controlled appearances and crafted statements, there was another layer of truth, one that never reached the public eye in its entirety but emerged only through whispers, unnamed sources, and a fragment of intimacy that revealed the burden Dakota herself had carried. For it was said by a close friend in an unnamed article that some weeks before releasing her video statement, Dakota had written a letter to Sam. Not a love letter as some might have wished, not a passionate declaration to fuel the fantasy, but rather a quiet, apologetic note, handwritten in her careful script, a private attempt to untangle herself from the suffocating web of rumor without hurting the person who had been caught alongside her. In that letter, she had written words that revealed both her honesty and her vulnerability. I apologize if my silence has hurt you. I don't know how to deal with the speculation when people keep making up a version of us that doesn't exist. I just want to keep it real. That I like you, but I don't love you. And I hope that doesn't diminish the respect we have for each other. Those words, never spoken aloud, never shared beyond the safety of paper and ink, carried within them the essence of her struggle, the desire to be truthful without being cruel, the instinct to protect their friendship while resisting the demands of a public that wanted to twist it into something it was not. But she never sent the letter. Instead, she folded it carefully, pressed it between the pages of her personal copy of The Great Gatsby, a book she had read and reread through the years, slipping the note between pages 137 and 138. At the moment when Gatsby gazes across the bay at the green light, that eternal symbol of longing, of desire forever reaching for something that cannot be touched, and perhaps, unconsciously, Dakota placed it there because it mirrored her own situation, because just as Gatsby's dream was not Daisy but the idea of Daisy, the public's fantasy was not her but the idea of her with Sam, an illusion projected onto her life that was no more attainable than Gatsby's dream of the past. When the storm finally broke, when the video had been released and dissected by every outlet and re-uploaded by fans across countless timelines, Dakota vanished from the public eye. For weeks she refused interviews, avoided premieres, declined to attend industry parties, her absence as loud as her words had been. Her silence this time not one of avoidance but one of recovery, a necessary retreat from the glare that had consumed her life. And when she did return, it was not at a film festival or a glittering premiere but at a modest charity event, where she appeared with her usual quiet grace, her face fresh and unadorned by elaborate makeup, her smile gentle but real, and though the press asked questions, they were less invasive this time, softened by the clarity she had offered. When one journalist asked her, "If you had to do it all over again, would you still keep quiet for so long?" she answered without hesitation, her voice calm but steady, "No, I would have spoken earlier, because sometimes silence doesn't protect anyone. It just allows the story to be written by people who don't know the truth." In those words was a lesson, not only for herself but for anyone living under the weight of assumption, that silence, though tempting as a shield, often becomes a prison, that by withholding the truth we allow others to craft their own narratives, narratives that can wound more deeply than words ever could. And then, one December evening, as the air outside was cold and the streets were lit with festive lights, Sam called her. Not with anger, not with bitterness, not with questions about why she had spoken as she had, not even with unspoken reproach, but with the simple humanity of someone who understood the weight of scrutiny, the burden of being misunderstood. His words were straightforward, almost disarmingly so. "Thanks for speaking up. I understand. Always understand." On the other end of the line, Dakota smiled, relief softening her voice as she asked, half in jest and half in earnest, "Do you get tired of people thinking you're in love with someone?" Sam's laugh, quiet but warm, came as an answer not only to her question but to the absurdity of the months they had endured, and he replied, "I get tired of people thinking you're not alone." That exchange, tender in its simplicity, revealed more truth about their bond than any rumor ever had, because it was not the language of lovers but of companions, colleagues, and friends who had endured the distortion of their reality together. And in that shared understanding lay the quiet strength of their connection, not romantic, not dramatic, but deeply human. And so, in the end, what remains of the story is not a tale of secret passion or love denied but of resilience, of how two actors, caught in the storm of projection, navigated the treacherous waters of public perception, how Dakota's honesty and Sam's silence together created a balance that allowed them both to survive the frenzy, how an unsent letter pressed into the pages of The Great Gatsby became a private symbol of boundaries held and respect preserved, how a simple phone call in December revealed that behind the spectacle of headlines there existed something far more valuable than the fantasy of romance. Mutual respect, kindness, and the shared knowledge that not every story told by the world is worth living.